Hey folks, I'm Tom Wong, Assistant Managing Editor at the Dallas Morning News, and I'm really lucky to have some of my favorite people in the room today to talk about the El Paso mass shooting narrative. We're really lucky to have Alfredo Corchado, our Mexico border correspondent and author of Homelands and Midnight in Mexico. Cassandra Jaramillo, the Dallas Morning News' public safety reporter who covers the Dallas Police Department. And a blessing for us, she's celebrating her 4th anniversary with us. And James Barragan, our Austin-based State House reporter, who's covering a lot of political stories, but also has the versatility to cover really difficult stories like the one we're going to talk about today. During the pandemic and this most tumultuous of years, our sense of time has grown distorted. The El Paso mass shooting can feel like a long, long time ago for some of us, but the events surrounding the massacre can also seem like just yesterday as we all grapple with our emotional wounds. On August 3rd, 2019, a white supremacist shot and killed 23 people and injured dozens more. The FBI is investigating the case as a hate crime and an act of domestic terrorism. The shooting was the deadliest attack on Latinos in modern American history. In the year following the tragedy, the Morning News interviewed family members of those slain, about a dozen of the injured, other witnesses, and many, many sources close to the investigation. And the team in front of you today reviewed hundreds of pages of documents related to the massacre. The reporting of this team brought the massacre's details into sharper definition, the grim determination of the suspected gunman's preparations and actions inside the store, the desperation of survivors hoping that their loved ones didn't die, their struggles to live the rest of their days without them. I wanted to start us off with Alfredo. Can you take us through that day, August 3rd, 2019, and what you experienced? And can you tell us about your deep personal connections to this tragic story?
Yes, well, El Paso is my adopted hometown. I'm an immigrant from Mexico, grew up in Central California, but El Paso has always been, the place that we sort of gravitate. We, as the entire family, and I think when you talk about El Paso, I mean it's like the Ellis Island of the Southwest. So there are millions of immigrants throughout the United States, from Latin America, predominantly from Mexico, who at some point came through El Paso. So it resonates in many corners of the country. This is a day when we were all getting ready to celebrate my father's birthday. And my brother called from the east side of El Paso, roughly about 15 miles from where we live, and said, hey, I'm going to be running late. Something's happening to Cielo Vista or at Walmart. I'm not sure, but there are tons of police around the area. I didn't think much about it because I just thought, there may be an accident, etc. But then the reports began to trickle in that there was a mass shooter or mass shooters at the time, and that there might be multiple areas that were being targeted. This was a Walmart where we grew up. I mean, this was a place where we would go as young people. My parents had a small restaurant, Freddy's Cafe, and so every afternoon we would go to Walmart to pick up tomorrow's supplies. It didn't feel like I didn't quite get in that reporter mode. Again, because it was so personal, and I didn't really understand the magnitude. Also, when it starts to sink in that this is a big story, the other thought that came in was, I had been covering Mexico for many years. I've been covering the drug war for many years. I thought, another massacre. I mean, I covered massacres in Ciudad Juarez, massacres in Nuevo Laredo. But as the story started, becoming more and more clear. Especially the idea that this was someone who drove 650 miles, 10 hours. And you imagine this person just driving overnight and thinking, I'm going to El Paso to look for Mexicans to kill. I mean, the magnitude of that moment. And I remember during the day, I live in a bilingual family and come from a bilingual family. So we were trying to keep the news away from my parents. And I kept saying, I kept telling my brothers, talk to me in English, as we were all getting little pieces. And then I drove off. But I was determined not to break my father's heart on his birthday. Because I thought if anyone would be really affected by this, I mean, obviously the victims are affected, but I mean, this, I think, as I said before, I mean, impacted victims and just regular people, Mexican Americans, Hispanics. So it was a day when I was grappling with, balancing being a reporter and also being a son, and thinking to myself, this could have been my parents. I mean, it was the first few days of the month, so that's when the elderly usually go to the banks to cash or do bank activities. A lot of the victims who were targeted that day, nearly 50 people were shot. Eventually, 23 people were killed. But a lot of the victims were elderly, people who couldn't run away, people who had no chance. And so that magnitude has stayed with me since.
Alfredo, you've talked to me about the heartbreak of a son and just that moment when you're getting the reports on your smartphone and your father's sitting there with the birthday cake, and just the heartbreak of beginning to know that this is a story that you have to cover, and it's a story that your family could have lived as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a moment again, you're going back and forth between the reporter and between the son, and my father was celebrating, his 83rd birthday, thinking about the 84th birthday, and I'm thinking, if there's anyone who believes in this country, it's millions of people like my father who sacrifice so much to come to a new country, to give their sons and daughters a better life. And I'm not, someone who always taught us to do the right thing, obey the law. So yeah, that part of me was, what the fuck, America? I mean, what are we doing? What are you doing? There's just a conversation, with, with myself, basically.
So let me move to Cassandra and James. How did you begin to understand the enormity of what had happened and then become involved as reporters? Cassandra, why don't you?
Yeah, so I distinctly remember that day. I mean, it's almost like in slow motion, and I have flashbacks of being on the couch and probably around lunchtime seeing the CNN breaking news alert that there's been a mass shooting in El Paso. And unfortunately, given the extent of these shootings that we've seen in America, I thought, gee, another one. But the thing is that this was so much more evil than just a mass shooting. We later learned hours later that the alleged shooter was from North Texas. And that's when, shortly after that, detail was revealed by authorities that editors called me and they said, can you get on a plane to El Paso? And it was like immediately you're packing your bags, trying to get ready, calling Alfredo, who also was busy, just like, how are we going to tell this story? And, I think we launched into reporter mode immediately. I feel like I was functioning on that adrenaline for some time until it didn't hit me that it didn't hit me as also a Mexican immigrant and as my mom, who the people at our Walmart know her. I mean, there is a particular fascination that I would say Mexican immigrants have with Walmart, given the cheap prices and just everything that you can get there. And I remember trying to find food that first night and just breaking down. I sobbed so hard. First, because Chick-fil-A was closed, so there wasn't, and I hadn't eaten. And then it was like everything just started coming to me, and I mean, I've never experienced something like that. I mean, there are times you get emotional while reporting, but this was so many emotions just came, from within after filing the stories. And I absolutely think it's because of, my background and just, I saw a lot of my own family within the people who we talked to.
I mean, it's such a personal story, and knowing that you can't really compartmentalize it. James, what was your entry point to the story?
So I was out of pocket because I think the event happened or the shooting happened on a Saturday, and I was out of pocket that weekend. So it really was, Freddie and Cassandra who were down there on the ground the first couple of days. By the time Monday rolled around, they were just doing a great job. We had some photographers down there, and I was actually working. You mentioned I'm a political reporter here in Austin. I was working on another scandal that was brewing at the State House with the Speaker of the House, getting in some hot water. And it was a whole juicy scandal about secret recording and all these things that were coming out. So I was really focused on that story. And there was like lawsuits happening. But then at about Wednesday, I think there was a need for some reinforcements. I mean, Freddie and Cassandra had just been going since Saturday. So that's like half a week. And then also it started becoming a political story with the governor and the lieutenant governor and senators Cruz and Cornyn going down there to talk about the situation and also to give a news briefing. So that's how I got brought in. But we learned pretty early on, as Cassandra was saying, that this was much more than just another shooting, because we learned literally within hours that this man, the shooter, had he had premeditated it and had written out his plans and posted them on 8chan on an online forum, and that he specifically was down there to target Mexicans and Hispanics, and that he had been radicalized to think that there was this great invasion happening of Texas and that Hispanics were going to tear apart the fabric of what he believed to be his Texas. And you have to really understand, I mean, from El Paso to North Texas, where our paper is, it's 9 hours. It's a 9-hour drive. It's 10 hours maybe. It's not a short drive. So for this young man to, first of all, premeditate this shooting and put it down in writing, and then to drive 9-10 hours down to El Paso, and in that 9-10 hour drive, never think, hey, this is a bad idea, I shouldn't go through with this. It really showed us that there was something wrong going on. And particularly for us as Latino reporters, all three of us, and two of us are immigrants. I'm the son of immigrants. But it really hit home for us because it's exactly what everyone is saying. It could have been us, particularly Freddie, who lives there. He could have been at that Walmart. And it could have been us. It could have been in any other Walmart. But he chose that El Paso Walmart because that's where he believed Hispanics to be. And so for us, there was no way to turn to not follow this story anymore. And there was an uphill battle to continuing to follow this story. But that's sort of where we started. Like, it hit us really hard. It really hit close to home. And so there was no way we weren't going to follow up on.
And all three of you were about to embark on a really difficult and challenging 1-year journey that produced this in-depth narrative titled "Every Day is a Struggle: El Paso 1 year later," which was published just this past August. And James, I want you to talk about the genesis of that, because it really took um, a lot on your part to get the story started.
Yeah, so we were down there for I think about a week following the shooting, with Freddie and Cassandra being there the first couple of days, and I went in the latter half of the week. And then, as tends to happen with shootings or big mass news events, the trickle started slowing down, and there was not much more news to publish out, or to report out. There wasn't anything big that we needed to be there for anymore. And so they called us back, I think Friday or Saturday, just completely, and we were gonna regroup and regather and make sure we stayed on top of it. But with shortages of staff and with so much stuff going on, we know it's a crazy news cycle. Those conversations never ended up happening. And so we were about, I think, a month or maybe a month and a half after that, we just kind of realized, like, hey, we haven't had those talks. And why haven't we had those talks? I mean, we want to do, as the Dallas Morning News, we still think we're the premier paper in Texas, and we want to do this kind of enterprise. And I was just thinking, like, well, what could be more enterprise than reporting on this story? I mean, this is the biggest mass shootings of Hispanics in the country. And it happened in our state. It happened in a place where we have a correspondent. And if we believe we're the flagship paper of Texas, then we've got to dig really deep into this story, not only because of like the mass effect that it has, but because it is like a specific attack on Latinos in Texas. And if you're attacking Latinos in Texas, then you're attacking the very foundation and the very heart of Texas, because we've been here since the beginning of the state, and we're molded into this state's fabric. And so we just kind of started questioning, hey, what happened to all these follow-ups? What's going on? And we had to bring that up with our top editors. And I think the folks here on this call, Freddie in particular, and you, Tom, I think you guys helped grease the wheels to make sure that we got the resources that we needed to be able to do this important story. But there was a little bit of an uphill battle there in the beginning.
I would maybe talk about the importance of diversity. I mean, I really thought, being in El Paso and Mexico, I mean, I'm away from the politics in Dallas or in the newsroom, but I just assumed, that there were some people thinking big thoughts, and in recent years, our whole effort has been to try to bring the news from Mexico, from the border to North Texas, and I just thought, this is the golden opportunity to bring this up. I mean, this is how Texas matters to the rest of, the border routes to the rest of Texas. The fact that this guy came to stop the invasion, obviously this kid doesn't know history, because the whole Southwest belonged to Mexico at one point. So when I found out that James had brought it up, it was a wake-up call. Sometimes you feel like, there are enough people thinking back in Dallas to know that the magnitude of the story. There's got to be someone working on a long project, and I think that's when it hits you. It's an everyday struggle to make sure that these voices are heard, to make sure that diversity works. Even to the credit to the Dallas Morning News, we ended up spending a year because COVID got in the way, and because we couldn't get our game plan together. But it was a real lesson of how important it is to pressure from inside, and to make sure that these stories get covered and are not ignored.
I'm glad that you're talking about this. I think it's so important, because it's an example of how really good journalists with a lot of fire and passion and lived experience really push for stories like this. And also kind of the importance of having that diversity, not only among the reporting ranks, but also among the senior editors. And so it's just a case study in how we have to keep pushing for that. Cassandra, I want to ask you, as you began to think about reporting for the long narrative, like what did you think you'd have to get in the reporting in order to tell the story?
So I feel very proud of the breaking news reporting that we did following the aftermath of the shooting, but I think there were still the lingering questions of how did this happen? What exactly went down the day of? How much, why El Paso? I mean, that's the biggest question, is why El Paso? This young man could have gone, to Jefferson Boulevard in Dallas and, killed just as many Latinos, but he chose to embark on this 9-hour journey. And so we knew that there was a lot of reporting and trust to get, first from the families, the families of the victims, the family of Patrick Crusius himself. I mean, I think there was also these questions and just a natural speculation of where did this young man get these views, such hatred and such racism. Certainly had there's some influence that comes to that, right? And so that's where we divvied up the reporting, and I think there was especially a lot of interest in capturing what these families went through. Myself, just about a month or so after the shooting, I experienced what it was like to come under gunfire while reporting at a vigil. And that fear and that truly, like, the wondering if you're going to make it out alive. I mean, those were things that I've personally experienced, and I thought of these families a lot and their stories, but also wanting to navigate the sensitivity, because there's just so many different aspects to get with this story, right? And so that's where I feel like I did a lot of victim interviews. James did a great job with court documents and understanding the white supremacist online radicalization part of this. And Alfredo, it can't be stressed enough how important his hometown connection and the sourcing that he's, well known for. And I think we all came together and just had very good skills and journalistic wisdom to bring into this piece.
I just want to stress the word of teamwork.
Yeah.
And teamwork, but also passion. I mean, we get into journalism because of passion. And what I saw in my colleagues was, a determination. I mean, we're working weekends, we're working after our beats and so forth, but I think there was a real determination. And again, kudos to Barragan, who had, as we say, the huevos to, stand up and to management and say, hey, this is important. And when I got news of it, I go, I just thought this was happening. But Cassandra asked a good question. I mean, why El Paso? And which is, I think, it's the other lesson of the inflammatory language leads to consequences. I mean, El Paso's been on the spotlight during the Trump administration. Separation of families, humanitarian crisis. Weeks before this shooting, you had a GoFundMe telethon campaign where you had members of the Trump administration, former members of the Trump administration, Don Jr., in El Paso raising money. I think they ended up raising $25 million, who, by the way, some of the leaders have now been arrested under some pretty heavy allegations. But all that, you talk to the victims, and some of them point the finger directly at the Trump administration for, again, the use of inflammatory language, for impacting this young kid, influence him to come to the border and to carry it out his act. I mean, I remember when it first happened, when it trickled in that this kid was from North Texas. I mean, one of the first thoughts that popped into my mind was, did our immigration coverage contribute to this kid thinking that we were under attack by immigrants? That does play with your mind, and it also, I think, underscores the importance of what we write and context. I mean, context is so important in what we write and how we write things.
And I think to that point, I mean, it really is that's I think one of the central questions of the story, like why El Paso? And so, Cassandra talks about wanting to talk to the victims, and we all want to do that, right? But the big question was like, why El Paso, right? Because if you've ever been to El Paso, it's like one of the most loveliest cities in the world. The people are friendly, the people are nice. They want you to have a great time. It's a very welcoming
safe city too.
and it's a very welcome and it's a very welcoming place. And so why would this kid, who I don't think had ever been to El Paso, think that this was an invasion, quote unquote? And so that was something that, I guess that's why we pushed so hard on this story too, because it was very clear to us that it was a white supremacy attack, and it was an attack on Latinos. And I was happy to see that some of the politicians who have been scared to denounce white supremacy in the past did so after the El Paso shooting, and they did so very clearly, because there was no other way to describe what was happening there.
In early conversations about the narrative, you guys originally talked about the TikTok format, and there's definitely that element of chronology through a thread through the story. But for me as a reader, it becomes even much more than that, because you have 3 really compelling family stories within it. How did you begin to see that? Cassandra, you talk about, connecting with the victims. How did you find these 3 families? It's basically, is it a father, a son, and a mother? Is that right?
Yes. So through all reporting processes, right, you talk to as many people as possible, and Alfredo and I and James, I mean, we had made so many connections just from being there and staying in touch with people. I mean, I think that is one big key piece of advice, is that when you cover these stories, you want to stay in touch with everybody. And frequently talk to them. But there came a point where, Alfredo, I remember distinctly being in the coffee shop where we had done so much reporting and we had so much material. And I think I had to break it to you, like, we can't write about all of these people.
Coffee shop in El Paso.
Yes, that's right. And Tom, to your credit, your 5 questions template, I mean, that was something that Alfredo and I, we're having our cafecito with the, breakfast or whatnot. And I said, so, I mean, how are we going to tell this story? And we I feel like it was very organic. And at one point we even called James and had him on speakerphone while we're in El Paso. And we said, hey, these characters, first of all, there's just different complexities within the 3 families that we ended up focusing on in the story. And then also, when you're thinking about the narrative arc and where naturally they kind of make sense to come together, you'll notice that there's a part in the story at the reunification center where all of these families are together. And so, those were, to not get too much in the weeds, and I want to hear what Alfredo and James have to say, but that was how, I remember really thinking about, okay, you want to write about all of these people, right? But, as the tough decisions are to be made in journalism, that you have to make some tough edits and cut some stuff, we really tried to focus. And I thought a lot about, with the chronology and where naturally these families came together, and just the different characteristics that they brought.
Yeah, I mean, I always talk to narrative writers about, think about it cinematically. And when you're thinking about the camera, you can't be on 8 or 9 different people throughout a story, because then it becomes confusing, and the reader, the viewer, doesn't connect with them. So think about that one central, we use the word character, but one central person or two, and maybe at most 3. The really great book writers might know how to do several, but for a narrative story, typically 1 to 3 main characters works. And so Alfredo and James, knowing that, how did you, first of all, find these families, and then how did you decide to how were you able to get their trust?
Well, I go back to your point of movies, and it was a cafecito moments in El Paso, but it was also, I think, a very key moment Cassandra and I had in Dallas. And we were in one of these little offices and just thinking about an outline. And Cassandra, I guess it's a reflection of you, Tom, kept bringing up Tom Long and these 5 points. And I was getting a little impatient with that model, but it made a lot of sense. I mean, at one point I remember Cassandra got on the board there, the whiteboard, and just started writing, okay, let's think about this as a movie. And that's where the term TikTok came in. I think by then we had pretty much figured out, that this would not be these 10, 12, 20 characters, because every person had a very compelling stories. But at least my view was, we have to go to the people who can provide the most access, who feel the most comfortable. And I know one person, the Willie Menglesby, who lost his mother, and Cassandra did an amazing job at when she came to El Paso and interviewed. I mean, it was a really long interview, but we got so many details on that interview. And I ended up getting the guy's cell phone, which is always a good sign that he's willing to talk. The other person was also Dina, the mother of Javier Rodriguez. We had long conversations. I mean, you start to narrow it down, the complexities of the character. And as Cassandra says, organically, how do they come together at key moments of the narrative? The enchondos, again, Cassandra did a great job, and we're both sitting there with the Enchondo family. It was supposed to be maybe a half an hour interview, 45 minutes. I think it ended up being like a 3-hour interview. But the fact that we had this great access to them, and I mean, some of the people that we didn't use were just as compelling. I mean, a family who came from Gomez Palacio, Durango, who were saved, they believe, by a wheelchair they bought that morning at in an El Paso place, and then turned around and drove back 12 hours to get back to Durango. I mean, I ended up interviewing the family back in Durango and realized that the psychological effects are such that these kids never want to come back to the United States, and when they're near a Walmart, they just freak out. I mean, so you had to debate all this, but I couldn't, going back to Durango, having that kind of access. But also, these were 3 people who lost their loved ones, and we wanted to follow their grieving process, follow the healing process, if you will, if there was any healing. And I think in the end, I mean, it's really a credit to the victims, and a credit that they trusted us enough to allow us in to tell their stories. And it's a case where, I mean, you hope you did their stories justice.
Why do you think they trusted you? What were the ingredients to helping them trust you?
You have to ask them, but I mean, I think, I know this word gets used a lot, especially in a political campaign, but I think the word empathy. the listening to people. I mean, oftentimes I would go, for example, I would spend time with Dina, and I've listened to the tapes. I don't say much, but Dina would just talk and talk and talk, because I think they needed someone to talk to. They needed someone to listen to the story. I think they believe that maybe by sharing the stories, not only would they feel better, but maybe it would prevent a future massacre, in a sense. And the stories are quite fascinating. I mean, every character was very fascinating. The Inglesby family coming from Louisiana via New Mexico, and where you have the Anglo Mexican American world, they integrate. The Dina's family from Ciudad Juarez. I mean, the stories. I mean, each story could have been their own movie. I think when we first turned the story in, I think every writer can maybe empathize with us, but it was nearly a $8,000 word piece. So there obviously had to. There was a lot of editing done.
If there's any takeaway from this session, Alfredo, Cassandra, and James, I'd say that empathy and listening are just so incredibly crucial to this kind of reporting. And it's, reporters are often stereotyped as, loud, aggressive people. And you have to be that way with public officials, but with families of victims, I mean, empathy, that's what it's all about. I want to turn...
In preparation. I mean, listening, empathy, and preparation. And again, watching Cassandra that morning, and she had a whole list of stories, and just watching her, methodically go point by point by point by point, I thought, man, she did her homework.
I want to turn just for a moment to the gunman. So there are some very strong sections kind of explaining his journey. James, would that be part of your involvement in trying to understand this white supremacist and what might be in his head?
Right. Yeah. And we didn't start from scratch. There had been reports from our paper and from other news outlets about how this guy was a troubled man, Patrick Crusius. He was a troubled young man, and there had been trouble in his family life. The police had been called to some situations involving him that were unclear at that point. And he was just kind of he was kind of a loner, I guess, for lack of a better word. He didn't have that many friends. And so he turned to the internet and being online, and he loved playing video games. And it just so happens now that what we're seeing is that those places, the internet and video games and being online, are now turning into breeding grounds for white supremacy and other hate groups. And so we took some of the previous reporting that Cassandra, for example, had done on his family history, and that some other news outlets had done, and we just wanted to dig deeper. And we also went and found the his screed, his quote unquote manifesto about why he wanted to do this. The internet companies have done a good job of trying to scrub it from being searchable, but it's the internet, and so it's still available. So with a little bit of easy digging, we were able to find it again and just really go through it and not give it credence, which is one reason why we chose not to directly quote from it, but to try to understand what was in this guy's head. And so we read through it, and we just started connecting dots from some of the things that Cassandra had seen in the family life, and then also from what actually ended up happening after the shooting. He had gone into the El Paso shooting ready to die at the shooting, and talking, I think, really big talk, which is easy to do when you are on an online forum and on the internet and there's no real consequences. And he did, and we we as writers, when we were going through it, we did use these words that he had this illusion of grandeur that he had. He was this kid, no military experience. Far as we know, the closest he ever got to being in the military was playing Call of Duty in a video game. But he really thought of himself as a warrior to take back America. And so that gave us some insight into like who this guy was, what he was thinking. But it also showed us that there is this very, very real difference between what you're saying online and then what happens when you're and actually in the real world. He had gone in there prepared to die of being shot by police or perhaps one of the other people at the store. He said they could have a gun and they'll just shoot me, and I would prefer that because I don't want to face my family and they're going to think that I'm a racist. But what actually ended up happening is this kid who online had this idea of grandeur, he just turned himself in as soon as he saw the cops. And he said, I'm here, I'm the shooter, I'm here to shoot Mexicans. And so it just gave you like that insight, and it was pouring through those documents that were already publicly available, some of the previous reporting on his family history, and then a bunch of documents that we were able to obtain that really shed way more light into who this guy was. And he was a troubled young man, and I think there's still questions about his mental capacity and his mental health that we raise in the story that the family and its lawyers and their lawyers did not answer. But I think that you get a pretty clear idea that not everything was right with this young man.
The story is very much an intersection of lives, as well as all of you have talked about. And part of that intersection takes us through a really, really difficult section on 3 minutes inside the Walmart. I don't want you to reveal your sources, but can any of you talk about kind of the importance of smartphones and videos that you found publicly to help provide background for this, Alfredo or Cassandra?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were key. I mean, one of the people I talked to was a mother from Paso Redux, Chihuahua, which is about 150 miles from El Paso. But she had come to El Paso to shop for her daughter back to school clothes and back to school supplies. And at that moment, when the shooting started outside, she later told me in an interview that she was on the phone with her husband. They were doing FaceTime, and she was showing her husband, do you like this suit? What do you think of this? What do you think of that? So in that video that she showed me, I mean, you can hear the guns. I mean, the gunshot becoming louder and louder, and then you just see her running. I mean, you see this chaos that's going on inside the Walmart. Subsequently, you saw other videos from other shoppers, people on the ground. I mean, it really helps capture what happened in those 3 minutes. Some of the videos that some of the victims gave to authorities said that they didn't get those back, and they're part of the investigation. But there's certainly a lot of material to really get a sense of what happened inside those 3 minutes.
And one of the things too is that it's not like just official, videos that we saw. It is a lot of FaceTime or recollections of a FaceTime call or a Facebook video. Cassandra found one of the videos of the soccer team that was outside selling, and the coach urging them to come buy for their come buy juice for their fundraisers, And then also even just it's a combination of everything, documents and sources, and then the shoe leather reporting. I mean, with the Inglesby's, Alfredo, we know that Angelina Inglesby was on the phone with her son right as she was checking out. And that's just like, it hit me so hard. He was like on the phone with her, and then suddenly there's this shooting at the Walmart, and the rest of the family is trying to figure out what happened. Where is she? Did she get out alive? And there's this one son who had been on the phone with her probably seconds, probably minutes before this started happening. I mean, it just really is such a combination of everything, and the team putting all of these different sources together into this crunch and tightly knit narrative. It was difficult, but I think the story reflects a lot of different perspectives.
And one thing real quick that I'll add is that I really think timelines, they can be a chore, but I started one kind of early on. And it was something that we built out. And it was just so easy because, first of all, it helped us wrap our heads around what happened that day. And then also it was incredibly important in the fact-checking process, because that's where we also documented what came from a source, what was from a document, what came from a video that we saw. And so that was I think, again, a valuable piece of it. I'm the very type A, well, James can also be very type A person too. But yes, that was something that I was very glad that we had, so that when we were in the thick of the writing, we could just visit that to also fact check as well.
Alfredo, you're not type A?
No.
You're type C?
I'd be like, Alfredo, put this in the folder. We're
I know. But I mean, Cassandra's so right. I mean, when doing the fact checking, I mean, it was easy to just go back to that document, and it almost had like minute by minute at some points.
Yeah.
That it made it better. And I would just, at some point, I would say, Cassandra, I got these documents. Send them to me, damn it. Just send them to me. Let me get them in. And it really pays off.
So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to encourage our audience to chat their questions. This is a recording, but some of us will be here live to answer your questions. I do want to make sure we give tribute to the editors on this narrative. So is it Dave Hyatt and Keith Campbell, or were they the key editors on this? And they worked with you guys to bring it from 8,000 or 9,000 words down to about 4,000. Can one of you talk about that process?
I mean, the editors were very key, but I think it's fair to say, and I think we all agree, I mean, Keith Campbell made sure we got it home. I mean, and just the way he whittle it down. I mean, but you see that kind of dedication, and you see that, you know, the commitment. I think in the end, I mean, we looked at it and I was afraid, you know, how do you cut from 8,000 or 7,000 something to, was it 3,000, Cassandra, 4,000?
Yeah.
And you know, you as a writer, you're just afraid you're going to lose so much, but he did a hell of a job.
I want to, as we wrap up, I want to kind of come full circle to something, Alfredo, that you said, and it's about the personal, emotional connection to the story. And in another piece for LitHub, and you referred to this, Alfredo, you wrote, "Finally, the volcano inside me exploded. What the fuck, America? What does it take to be American?" It's like you've built your career in trying to be a bridge of understanding, but now you felt like a broken bridge. What do you mean by that? And so how did this story give that perspective to you?
I mean, as an immigrant, you're constantly debating, you know, and you're asking your parents, did we do the right thing in leaving Mexico? I mean, what would our lives have been like had we stayed in Mexico? So I think, you know, it may sound like a cliche, but I really honestly believe that stories do heal. And for a year, I mean, I just put my head down, I was reporting, but it hit me sometime in July when we were doing some discussions, Zoom, mind you, where I was feeling, and in one particular meeting, I mean, I just broke down. And I realized that maybe the years of covering Mexico, the years of the drug violence in Mexico, combined with the El Paso massacre, was finally led me to that volcano erupting. I mean, I think when I wrote it, I was in Mexico City, the LitHub, but it really happened in a very public way. And I'm not ashamed to say, you realize that there's some things in you that you have to work on. I did start talking to a counselor, and I did realize that, there's a lot of stuff you carry. And I can only imagine what these victims have gone through, what these other families have gone through. But it's also a reflection that as a reporter, I mean, you're not immune to that. And so that just erupted.
So we've covered a lot in the session. We've talked about the amount of reporting that it takes to be able to write an in-depth narrative like this, ranging from gaining the trust of families to going through the documents to understanding what social media and smartphone information might be out there to help you. We talked about the narrative writing, the importance of identifying your central characters, reporting to get the details for scenes in your story, and the importance of a timeline to help you with the chronology of the story. But most importantly, we talk about, as reporters and human beings, the importance of having empathy and truly listening to the people that we write about. So it's really been meaningful for me to hear you guys talk about that. We want to thank the Mayborn for having this wonderful narrative conference, and for our audience for spending time with us. And most especially, I want to thank Alfredo, Cassandra, and James for taking us through their journey and for honoring the families and the lives lost in this really tragic massacre. Thank you, folks. Hopefully you'll be sending us your questions and we'll answer them live.